Hi, and thank you for coming to Advancing Differentiation Part 2. My name is Denise Cooley. I work at North Canton City Schools. I am the gifted coordinator there, and this is about my fourth year, I think. This year, as we were working to help some of our teachers get their gifted hours, we did a book study on advancing differentiation. And it was a really engaging, entertaining book study, and I feel like the feedback was really strong, particularly when we started looking into the second half of the book, and that is what we're going to focus on for part two. The information kind of shifts from the basic theory of differentiation and what students need to have in their classroom and in their curriculum, and how we can craft our curriculum to make it engaging, effective, exciting, and all of those things. It shifts to talking about how we can really teach kids to think and how we can develop critical thinking skills and creative thinking skills. You'll see a picture of advancing differentiation on the slide. The author, Richard Cash, is a phenomenal writer, but he's also a very energetic and engaging speaker. If you have the opportunity to ever see him speak live, please take that opportunity. You will not regret it. He also has quite a few things out on the internet in YouTube. He has a periodic morning meeting called Coffee with Katie and Richard that is something that will count for gifted hours for those of you who are trying to meet that initial 60-hour requirement or are looking to meet the requirement after that initial 60 hours. That is very entertaining and engaging and goes across disciplines. If you're looking to maybe have a book study in a PLC or TBT, Advancing Differentiation is a great book. There's also a link to a book study PDF form that has questions and activities for each chapter. So as I kind of front loaded, the focus of this presentation is going to be on developing thinking in your classroom. And we know how important thinking is, and getting our kids to think and even think about how they think is a vital part of education today. Cash really sets the stage by thinking about the things that our students will need in the future workplace. And we know that we're preparing students for jobs that haven't even been created yet, which is kind of scary if you think about it. How do you create and develop the skills that students need when you don't know what those positions are going to look like? And Cash really does a great job of identifying what those skills are going to be. We know that our kids are going to have to be flexible as they graduate college or as they enter the army or as they, learn a trade. We know that they're going to have to be flexible in their thinking, in their everyday life. They're going to have to be able to adapt and to change. We also know there's going to have to be a social awareness. Kids are going to have to be able to communicate, and they're going to have to collaborate with folks from different cultures, different ethnicities, different races. We know that kids are going to have conceptual thinking. They're going to have to think across disciplines and across we know that students are also going to have to be able to adapt to new technology. We know that technology is always changing. We've seen that with the evolution of the iPhone, that it changes and it changes rapidly. We know that students are also going to have to be creative. They're going to have to be able to self-regulate themselves. They're going to have to be independent. They're going to have to be able to think about goals and know how to meet goals. They're going to have critical reasoning and the ability to solve complex problems as a team. And they're also going to have resiliency. It is so important for students to know how to fail and pick themselves back up and keep going. I know that this is something that we've tagged as gifted PD, and this is something that gifted kids so many times struggle with. The ability to develop resiliency, to fail and keep going, and fail again and keep going. All of these things are important in our future workplaces. And when we think about thinking, there are two types of thinking. We have divergent and we have convergent thinking. It's important to note that divergent thinking is not better than convergent thinking, and convergent thinking is not better than divergent thinking. In fact, our kids in the next, as we develop them for the future, for future jobs, for the future workplace, our kids need both divergent and convergent thinking. Divergent thinking is where we diverge from usual pathways. I think about two roads diverged in a yellow wood. They go off the beaten path. So our divergent thinking is when we think unlike the usual pathway. We may think unlike those in our group. Divergent thinkers come up with many ideas, but they still need to be accepting of all. When you're thinking divergently, you want to use all your senses. You want to think about touch and taste and sound and smell. You want to take the opportunity to rest and reflect. You want to take risks, and then you want to add on to other ideas. Our best thinkers take ideas that other folks have and add on to them. Now, convergent thinking is when we converge on one right answer. I think of it as many roads lead to the highway, and we have entrance ramps where people are getting on board. We're converging to one right answer. When we are taking steps to do convergent thinking, we want to clarify the problem. We want to evaluate all the different solutions, look at different options. We want to be reflective, take time to rest and sleep on it, and then we also want to be positive. It's really easy when we're trying to narrow down our options into just one. It's very easy to slide into the negative and complain about other ideas and other possibilities. We want to be positive and we want to focus on the positive. It's important as teachers for us to develop both divergent and convergent thinking. And we can develop both by creating what's called a thinking classroom. We want to make sure that our classroom is a place where our students are thinking. This is not the type of classroom where we're talking about a sage on the stage, where the teacher is the person who has all of the answers. We are talking about a classroom where every student is recognized as capable of advanced thinking, and every student is respected and given a place to practice advanced thinking. So, when you're looking at your classroom and you're trying to determine whether or not it is a thinking classroom, look at these characteristics. Are we encouraging our students to have intellectual independence? Are we encouraging our students to have unique ideas, different ideas, maybe that stray off the beaten path? Are we recognizing brain development and the fact that all of our students have different brain development and think in different ways, but that is still valuable? Encouraging risk-taking, and that's a really interesting characteristic. What that means is we let our students be wrong. I think of strategies like my favorite no or my favorite mistake, or when we celebrate when students try. Maybe they don't succeed, but they tried. They came up with a really good idea. Maybe it didn't work, but it was still a really good idea. In my favorite no, or my favorite mistake, a teacher, looks at work samples and pulls out a mistake that students had made and highlight that mistake, and then as a class work on correcting it. Another great characteristic of a thinking classroom would be that there are a lot of different ways to solve problems, and those problems are celebrated. The thinking classroom eliminates bullying. There is no putting down students for the way they think or the decisions that they've made academically. The thinking classroom focuses on growth mindset. It's about growing students, thinking about the effort, the everyday effort that students are making to grow academically and grow as individuals. And then the thinking classroom also nurtures social relationships and community, builds responsibility for learning within learners, and is enjoyable and fun. And I can't highlight this enough. I know I said it previously. The thinking classroom recognizes that all students are capable of advanced thinking. Every student in your classroom is capable of this type of thinking. So here's some strategies to allow your classroom to develop into a thinking classroom. And the first one, I think, is one of the hardest ones for some teachers. I will raise my hand and say that I am guilty of this. I have always been guilty of it. It's something that I have to consciously think about, and that is wait time. Asking a question or letting a student ask a question, having a student ask a question, and waiting. Waiting can be uncomfortable, but waiting does allow students the time and the opportunity to think. Not every student thinks rapidly. Sometimes students take a little bit of time to process. And the more time that we can wait, the more time we develop the opportunity for our students to think. The other great strategy for thinking is open-ended questions. Open-ended questions such as, what do you think? Or how do we know? Or what if this happens? Where there's no right answer, allows for our students to really dive in. It provides an opportunity for students to have low risk in that there isn't a right or wrong answer. And it gives them the opportunity to really explore. As I was reading these chapters, I really reflected back on the making student thinking visible practices, particularly those cues to get more students to participate, such as asking a student what they think. Do you agree or disagree? Can you add on to something another classmate said? All of those are wonderful opportunities to extend the thinking in your classroom so that more students are thinking and more students are participating. The other strategy is to teach students to ask questions. We can do this by allowing students to journal after they read something or participate in an activity. In that journal, ask questions. What would you ask the character? What would you ask the author? What would you like to know about global warming? What would you like to know about the planet Mars? What would you like to know about the Civil War? Asking questions. And then reflection logs are a great way for students to reflect. And through reflecting, they're thinking critically about the learning that they've just engaged in. So once we kind of have that general definition of thinking and the thinking classroom, we want to talk about two specific types of thinking: critical and creative thinking. These are things, critical and creative thinking were certainly my favorite types of activities as a student. They were my favorite types of activities to include in my classroom. And I also feel that I hear from teachers a lot that there are activities that they feel like don't meet and match up beautifully with the standards. And so that's part of what we want to talk about today. So, how are critical thinking and creative thinking different? Well, critical thinking is ordered, directed, and controlled. It's basically an analysis. We want to look through all of the information that we know and kind of put it together and control it. Creative thinking is intuitive and seeks multiple answers. These are the resources I have. How can I use all of them in multiple different ways? What are all of the ways that I could use these resources? Here's the key though. Both critical thinking and creative thinking are advanced levels of thought, and they require more brain energy. So when we're talking about perseverance and when we're talking about developing resiliency, we need to give our students more opportunities to think critically and to think creatively, because both of them need to be practiced. Students struggle to think critically, and some students really struggle to think creatively, but they get better as they have more and more and more opportunities to engage. So, our critical thinking strategies. The first thing that we can teach our kiddos to do is to validate information. We want to teach our students to figure out, hey, is this the right information? Is this accurate? Is it precise? And really, that goes beautifully with our standards. We want to teach students to sequence events, sequence their thinking, organize their thoughts. Another wonderful wonderful critical thinking strategy is comparing and contrasting. If we think again that critical thinking is organized thinking, putting it all together, you can organize your comparing and your contrasting through a Venn diagram or a graphic organizer that really puts everything together. Critical thinking strategies are also prioritizing facts or information. So this goes back to the standards, right? We adopted Common Core quite a few years ago, and how does Common Core work with critical thinking? And it really works beautifully. When we look at some of our standards, such as developing or determining a central idea, identifying the intended audience, recognizing the genre of a text, inferring events from a text. All of those are what we would call very important standards in ELA, and all of them require critical thinking. We can't identify or determine a central idea or a theme unless we've read all of the information and we've organized our thoughts. We can't identify the audience that this piece was intended for unless we've read, organized our thoughts, and pulled pieces of information together. Same thing with recognizing genre, and really inferring is the ultimate critical thinking skill, right? We're taking all of the information that we know and then making an educated guess based on that information. Our strategies to help our students with these standards: scanning, skimming. So very important for our students to be able to, run their eyes over a piece of paper or a text, to try and pick out key ideas. note making, and you'll notice that I didn't use the phrase note taking, I used the phrase note making. Reading a text, chunking it into paragraphs or subsections, and then condensing that information into main ideas, key points, that's note making. And that's a critical thinking skill. The more we practice it, the better we're going to get. When I looked at Richard Cash's work here, and critical thinking and reading strategies, I will say text rendering is not in this Advancing Differentiation book, but it's something that really jumped out to me. Text rendering is where you read a section of a text and you pull out the most important paragraph, then you pull out the most important sentence, then you pull out the most important word. That all goes down to sequencing and prioritizing, and it's critical thinking. Free writing, group discussion, peer review, all of those are wonderful critical thinking strategies for reading and writing. Can be used across disciplines. However, we also see quite a bit of critical thinking in math and science. When I look over here at our standards, whenever you see the word estimate, estimation is a critical thinking skill that is embedded in our math standards and also our science standards. You have to take information, you have to estimate it, you have to put pieces together and come out with a new product. Justifying your answer in math, explaining and using evidence to support claims. Another tie to two standards in math and in science. Validating evidence and then using control data in science is another great way to embed critical thinking. And again, I'm going to say these are all in the standards. Ways that our students are expected to think critically are embedded in our standards. So, when you really think about it, critical thinking is so important to all of our standards. So, how do we work on our critical thinking skills in math and science? One of the strategies that Cash really talks about is complete and incomplete. And that can be a pattern. So maybe you have 12 blank, 20 blank, 28, and you need to, come up with what the blanks are. Maybe it's looking just at scientific method, which is a very ordered approach to an investigation. Having students design their own experiments using scientific method. That's really important. Another one is reflect, rethink, and rework. I've completed a unit, or I've completed an experiment. I'm going to reflect on what happened. I'm going to rethink the parts that didn't go well, and then I'm going to rework them. Doing logic and math puzzles. I often have teachers tell me that, well, those logic and math puzzles, they aren't necessarily standards based. And sometimes that's correct that they're not, but however, they do have a place in our educational classrooms because they teach kids to think in a different way, to take information and apply it. So that particularly when we're looking at math, it's not putting numbers into an algorithm. It's using information to solve a problem. Fractals are a great way to look at critical thinking in math and science. Another really awesome one is my favorite no, which we talked about earlier as well. Okay. So then that puts us into creative thinking. The essential ingredient that makes entrepreneurs, mathematicians, business leaders, teachers, and artists successful. That's what creative thinking is. When I sit down with my second grade and my fifth grade teachers and we really look at those creative thinking checklists that you have to do in order to identify creative thinkers, I always tell my teachers, we're looking for our entrepreneurs. We're looking for our business leaders. We're looking for our artists. We're looking for those kids who can take resources or information and they can see them in a way that no one else does, or they can combine them in multiple ways, many more, many more than anyone else can. It's just something that sets students apart. We know that our creative thinkers are inclusive and they're also aware. In order to be a creative thinker, you have to include all thoughts and all schools of thoughts, and then you have to be aware of all of the different uses of an object, or all of the different paths, or all of the different connections that are possible to make. And what I think is so interesting about creativity is both divergent. And remember, divergent is going in all different directions, going in unique directions. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood. They're going in different directions. And convergent. So we both diverge and we converge in creativity. So that creativity is both the student who can come up with a plethora of ideas and options, and also the student who can come up with one unique idea that solves the problem. We know that our creative individuals are motivated. They have a solid knowledge base. You cannot be creative without having a great base of factual knowledge. Creative individuals enjoy challenges. Maybe they even seek them out. They want to do things that no one else wants to do because they see things in ways that no one else sees them. We also know that creative individuals are patient, persistent, and they have perseverance. So they keep working, they keep trying, and they're patient while they're doing it. So, if we want to develop creative thinkers and creativity in our students, we want to first encourage fluency. And fluency is the ability to come up with multiple ideas, multiple concepts, multiple options that meet the criteria. So this is where you're going to want to think about lists. And lists can still be standards based. So maybe you want to list as many numbers as you can that are divisible by 3 or divisible by 9 or divisible by 10. Maybe you want to list all the things you can think of that are related to space. Maybe we're talking about grammar, and so you want to list as many 3-syllable words as you can, or as many adjectives as you can, or nouns or adverbs. Maybe you want to list all of the things that involve the Civil War, all of the generals from the Civil War. Maybe you want to list all of the questions you would ask a character or an author. But again, that fluency is working with the standards to build knowledge. The other thing you want to do is encourage flexibility. Flexibility in thought. So the ability to make connections, maybe across disciplines, or the ability to use things in a different way. So maybe you want to create a metaphor for photosynthesis, or maybe you want to create a metaphor for factoring. Maybe you are talking about math and budgeting. What items could be bought at the dollar store that you would build a house for, or a house with? Plan a menu for a diverse guest list. I think it was Tom Rounds, would, do a presentation on depth of knowledge, and he would talk about a activity that he had planned with his 4th and 5th grade team for a Thanksgiving dinner, and students had the ads in front of them, like from Giant Eagle and Bueller's and maybe Costco and all of the grocery stores, and they would have to plan a menu for a family of 4 plus a vegetarian who was invited to dinner and a gluten-free person who was invited to dinner. And so there has to be some flexibility and thought there. Another great way to encourage flexibility but also match those standards is to ask your students to show a different way to represent their answer. And that can be across the curriculum. Just asking the question, what's another way to look at that topic? Or what's another perspective can encourage flexibility in thought. We also want to emphasize originality when we talk about creativity. So from your list, what item did no one think of when we're looking at that list about items in space or things in space, or we're looking at that list of nouns or adjectives? What's the one that no one else thought of? Creating a new use for something is another great strategy to emphasize originality. I love the strategy RAFT, which stands for role, audience, format, and topic. It's a writing strategy, and it allows kids to really create original works of art or works of writing that also, really focus on the discipline. Another way to emphasize originality is to create a new ending for a short story or a play. Inspiring elaboration. And this is something I feel like kids struggle with a lot, is the ability to elaborate, the ability to add on. Writing an epilogue, a prequel, or a sequel is a great way to inspire elaboration. Having students explain their thoughts, explain how you arrived at your answer, explain how you came up with that. It might be asking a student to paraphrase what another student said. Going back to that making student thinking visible work that has been done around the county, asking a student to add on, asking a student to rephrase. All of those are elaboration techniques. Going back to those ELA Common Core standards, citing textual evidence, referring to details in the text, justifying answers. All of that is elaboration. Making connections to similar events in history, and then also changing the environment and discussing how changing the environment would affect the outcome is another great way to look at inspiring elaboration, getting kids to go further, deeper, give more information. So we do have some creative thinking activities, and I listed all of the ones that Cash has gone over in his book. And I know that we're not going to have time to talk about all of these today, and that's okay. I linked some of the ones that are out there. You can, look them up if you're interested in them. The first one is pretty popular. It's called Scamper. And what Scamper does, it stimulates flexibility and originality. It sparks kids' thinking. So what you do is you use it as an acronym. The S stands for substitute. What could you substitute to make something better? Instead of what, could you add something else? What if I change this? Those are all questions to ask. The C stands for combine. What could you combine with this to make it better? If I put blank with this, it will create what? It sparks students' thinking. The A stands for adapt. What could you adapt on a blank to make it better? What could you adapt on a motor to make it better? How can you adapt the idea of photosynthesis? If I change the environment, it will affect the outcome. How? These are all sample questions to use with Scamper. Modify is what M stands for. Where might I put a greater emphasis on this to make it better? The P is put to other use. The E is eliminate. What could I simplify or eliminate to make this better? And the R is revise. What can I revise to make it better? The roll cards are also pretty neat. They allow students to really take ownership over their learning, and the roll cards encourage fluency, flexibility, originality, and elaboration. They could be great for vocabulary. They could be great for inferencing using textual evidence, analysis, argument, and perspective. Great pre-reading activity. And really, they would be used very nicely in both social studies and English language arts. So how you do roll cards? You divide students into small teams. Each group pulls a card. The group develops a scene based on the roll card that they've drawn. Cash gives examples of roll cards. The R stands for roll, the O, occasion, the L, location, and the E, emotion. So you pull out your roll card and you may have a writer at a business meeting, in a restaurant, feeling disgusted. And it would be up to the student to use vocabulary for them to write something that allows the audience to infer the emotion. The students who are watching or reading the product from this roll card would then have to use analysis and develop an argument to explain why they felt each student was projecting this emotion and why. There are variations on all of these activities, and they're all great opportunities to use in the classroom. Living timeline is another one that's great for elaboration. Students choose a point in history and create a timeline, then they act it out or narrate it. For those of you who have used Reader's Theater, you can see how that is a creative thinking activity. Students act out a part of a story or a play. In Name 5, students sit in a circle. They have a small object and they rotate it. And then at some point, you stop and you say to the person, name 5 animals in the zoo, or facts that are divisible by 5, terms from the unit of study, etc., etc. That's a great review game, actually. Name 5. But these are, like I said, all available in the Advancing Differentiation textbook, and certainly can be expanded upon. If you'd like more information on any of them, just go ahead and shoot me an email. I think, again, just to kind of wrap up our presentation today, what we really want to focus on is all kids deserve a thinking classroom. They deserve the opportunity to think and think deeply. All kids deserve the opportunity to develop critical thinking skills, and then all kids deserve the opportunity to develop creative thinking skills. All kids need the opportunity to practice thinking, practice thinking critically, and to practice thinking creatively. And beyond that, both creative thinking and critical thinking are embedded in our Common Core standards and can be embedded in our everyday lessons as a way to meet Common Core standards, but then also to develop students for the future workplace. Overall, thank you again for listening to my presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email is denise.cooley@northcantonschools.org. Have a great day.